there are 5 key traits that all leaders possess, and I'm here to share with you today what they are and why they're important. All right, let's get started. Number 1, humility. Great leaders are humble. They're not afraid that they don't have all the answers. They're not afraid to admit when they make mistakes, and they're just open to hearing other ideas. I think that that's so important. I've been around some of the most successful individuals in the world, and it's incredible to me that unless you knew the success they've had, you would never know, because they don't talk about themselves, they're open, and then when they talk to you, they're just a normal, everyday person, and they just exude humility. I think humility is so important and crucial, especially as a leader. Number 2, curiosity. To me, curiosity is kind of like the thread that goes through everything. Great leaders are curious. They're always interested in other ideas, different ways to do things, looking at problems, especially ones that are critical for them to solve, and thinking about, hey, there's got to be a better way to do this. On the flip side of being curious, if you're somebody who is a know-it-all, like in my book, The Learn-It-All Leader, I talk about the difference between being a learn-it-all and a know-it-all. Know-it-alls have all the answers. They have it all figured out. They're not curious. And in my opinion, if you're somebody who's a know-it-all and you're not curious, you're going to get left behind, because great leaders realize that there's always more to learn. Number 3 is integrity. Now you may say to yourself, well, shouldn't that just be a given? Well, you'd be surprised. Not all leaders and individuals have high integrity. Integrity to me means, if you're a leader and you say something, live up to your actions. When I played at Pepperdine, Coach Andy Lopez, Hall of Fame Coach Andy Lopez, he had 2 rules. Number 1, show up on time. Number 2, always do the right thing. And people might say, well, what do you mean, Coach Lopez, do the right thing? And you know what he said? You know what it means to do the right thing. Do the right thing and do it all the time. To me, that's integrity. And one of the reasons why integrity is so important, if you want to be a great leader, you got to have trust. And trust starts with you earning the trust of your team. Once your team members earn your trust, you're going to be able to trust them in return. So integrity is super key. Moving on to number 4 is accountability. Great leaders are accountable. I look at it this way. If something goes well at Learn It, I want to give the credit to my team. All right? I want to give it to my team members. Celebrate them, appreciate them. And if something goes wrong, if we have a major failure or even a minor failure, I think it's the responsibility of the leaders to step up to the plate and say, hey, that's on me. One thing I remember from this particular coach was when things went well, it was always because of him. For example, if we won a game, he's out there being interviewed, talking about the great pitching decisions he made, the lineup changes, stuff like that. But the moment something went wrong, if we went into a losing streak, he would say things like, hey, you know why we lost? Because our 4th up hitter struck out with 2 guys on 2nd and 3rd. And I remember that because I was the 4th up hitter who struck out with guys on 2nd and 3rd. But you know what happens when leaders and coaches pass the buck? The team members don't feel like you have their back. And if people don't feel like you have your back, then they don't trust you, right? And they don't want to work for somebody like that. As a leader, it's your responsibility, especially as a small business owner, like with me at Learn It. If something goes poorly at Learn It, it's on me. It's not my team's fault, okay? So I think it's important to be self-aware, and your team's looking for you to be accountable and to be a leader. Number 5 is courage. And what I'm referring to here is that great leaders aren't afraid to make bold decisions. Great leaders are decisive. Team members want to follow somebody who has the courage to make tough decisions, whether it's letting somebody go, whether it's not falling for the sunken cost fallacy. Great leaders have courage. When it comes to courage, I also think it's important for you to get comfortable with failure, okay? Have the courage to fail and use those failures as learning opportunities. A lot of times you'll see people who won't try something because they don't have the courage, because they don't want to embarrass themselves. I think a lot of great leaders come to a crossroads at some point in their career and they say, I just have to try things. I just have to do it. I have to stop worrying about what other people think. And sometimes that takes courage, because there's a lot of times where maybe you make a presentation and you fall on your face and you get laughed at. Great leaders realize that kind of stuff's going to happen, and you just got to use it as a learning opportunity to grow and get better. So those are my 5 key traits that I really believe that great leaders have. So number 1 is humility. You don't always have to be the smartest person in the room. I think the flip side of that is people who are know-it-alls, who figure they have all the answers. And a lot of times they have the least amount of answers. Number two is curiosity. You got to be curious. You got to be open and you got to be interested. I think it goes such a long way too with your employees. If you're talking to your employees or you're speaking with your customers, be present in those conversations. Ask questions. Great leaders ask great questions. Okay? So curiosity is critical. Number three is integrity. This should be a no-brainer, but do what you say you're going to do. Live by the values that you want your company and your organization to live by, and lead by example. Number four is accountability. Be accountable as a leader. No one wants to follow a victim. If something goes wrong, own it, right? As I mentioned earlier, if you have wins, give those wins to your team. What does it really matter, right? Don't make yourself what the story is about. Make the story about your team. Lead from behind. Give them the credit. Reward them. Trust me, it'll go a long way. And number five, have courage. Great leaders don't get stuck in decision paralysis, and they're not afraid to fail. I think it's critical that you get comfortable with failure and that you have the courage to try things and learn from them.
You have coached, trained, and interviewed thousands of leaders. What are you seeing that are the common and key traits that great leaders possess?
I think first and foremost, when it comes to leadership, the greatest leaders first know themselves. They're able to have a very high emotional intelligence. They're able to be in touch and lead themselves first. I love the fact that this is the Learn It All podcast, because I think great leaders are always learners. They're people that are constantly seeking knowledge. There's never an end. I think so often we get into roles, you mentioned sales and management, and we get into these roles and we think, well, gosh, I just want to learn everything that there is so that I can become an expert, right? And we look for that title, or we chase that, whatever it is at the end, the certificate, the degree, we're chasing this one thing. And the best leaders are the ones that realize, okay, well, that's nice. But once you've made it to that point, you can always look out. I think I've shared this analogy before. I don't know if you've heard this, Damon, but you're climbing to the top of the mountain, right? And when you get to the top of the mountain, you're able to look out and you see, hey, there's other mountaintops out there. I can still go chase other things. And so the people that really know themselves, because if you can't lead others until you can lead yourself. And the people that realize that they're always going to be learning. They're an avid student. I think those things are very important. We could, for goodness sake, we could go on this whole podcast for an hour about what are great qualities. I think probably a third one is, I really like this one and I'm going to go with it. And there's many, many more, but I think the third one that I stick with, and this is something that's really hit me in the last year, is leaders are people that get results from others. And I think we look at all of the soft skills from time to time. We look at, charisma, and they're well-spoken and they're empathetic and some of those less tangible items. But I do think it's something that you got to lead yourself. You have to be an avid learner, and you do have to get results on some level. You have to be able to bring other people along. It's one thing to talk about, it's another thing to do it and take action.
I couldn't agree more. And starting with self-awareness, I think to be a great leader, you have to have self-awareness, right?
Absolutely.
As well as, my book, The Learn It All Leader, that's what I talk about quite a bit, is I think leaders are always growing, and they understand that they don't have all the answers. And there's nothing wrong with not having all the answers and being vulnerable and asking for help, right?
Absolutely. Well, I think so often we get that identity. People that are in leadership roles or in management roles, we start to get that identity from other people, right? Those that we're leading. And they go, well, I'll go to Damon. He's always got the answers, right? And so that's how you then start to identify. And in some ways, we start to get this facade of, well, gosh, now they're coming to me. I got to have all the answers. And it's okay to step back and make sure and keep that humility, right? Be humble and say, hey, I don't know the answer to this one, but I know here's the key. The best leaders are the ones that will give you the advice and the direction on where to go get it. And they're deliberate on where it is that they're directing you. So they're not just, oh gosh, I don't know the answer. Go figure it out. Damon, I don't know the answer to that one or whatnot. But we start to get identified. And I think a lot of leaders fall in that. I've fallen in that trap of, well, gosh, they think I have all the answers. So I got to keep up that, that view, that outlook of that. Okay, well, if they're coming to me, I got to have all the answers. And it's okay to step back and just say, hey, you know what? I don't know this one, but here's the best place that I think you'd get it. And if we're really emotionally intelligent, if we're really self-aware, it's okay to realize, hey, where did I go when I was asking that same question? Because most of the time as humans, we all have a lot of similar questions. It's really important on where we go to seek those answers.
I totally agree. I think with vulnerability and humility, especially for new leaders, say you move in, Mike, you move into a new role, maybe you're promoted into leadership for the first time. And sometimes you could even be dealing with imposter syndrome and you're thinking to yourself, wow, do I even belong here? And then you want to come across as having all the answers, because if you don't have all the answers, you might perceive your team as thinking, well, this woman doesn't know what they're talking about. But getting back to vulnerability, I think it's a fine mix. You want to be vulnerable, but you also want to be able to show confidence that your team knows that that they can trust and that you can get things done. Like you said, execute.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting that you bring that up specifically, and as far as vulnerability and confidence, on my own show, on my podcast, that conversation has come up many times in this last year. I interviewed an author that specifically wrote a book on leadership vulnerability, Jacob Morgan. And we were sitting and talking about this, and there is a fine line. There's a fine line between being wishy-washy and never having the answer, and being confident in knowing what your abilities are, or at least getting somebody to 75 or 80%. And if you have to understand, and that's how I weigh it. Like, if I can't figure out something at 75%, if I can't be effective at 75% or better, then I need to be looking for somebody else that can. And so if somebody comes to me and asks a question regarding a subject, I told you I was listening to your last podcast with the gentleman, you said Hunter was his name?
Hunter Hastings, great guy.
Hunter, phenomenal, absolutely brilliant. But when he's talking about he's an economist, like that's something I would have no knowledge of. So I have to, rather than trying to navigate my way through that sort of discussion, I have to know, oh, well, hey, here's a person that I can connect with. And I almost think it builds you up better as a leader based on who you are able to call on in that network. Like, hey, I don't have the answer, but let me tell you, I know this person. I know Hunter Hastings. He is an absolute badass, right? And so here's who you would go seek this out from. And so often, especially if it's somebody that's new to a leadership role, they're chasing the title more than they are the all of the actions and execution and the whole scope of what it is they're supposed to be doing. They say, well, I got this, and for lack of a better term, Damon, they're using well, I got the manager title, right? Usually we get to be a manager, and then that's when people in business will start to view themselves as a leader. And so they chase that manager title rather than what are the things that a really good manager and leader does? What are the activities they engage in? When is it, who are the people that are the best that I've listened to, or that I know that I could lean on to get the right answers, and then be vulnerable enough to spread that information. You brought up that vulnerability. There's a fine line, to go back to vulnerability, between being vulnerable to say, well, I don't know, and I don't like the word, but I don't know, and here's where you can go to get the answer, versus I don't know, stop, versus, oh, you go figure it out. Those are two different sides of the coin, for sure, in my opinion.
And I love what you were talking about earlier around how great leaders are always, literally what I heard you say is they're curious, right? They're always learning, and they have a passion for learning. And I think that great leaders have a tendency as well. If you're dropped in a room with a Hunter Hastings or art aficionado or whatever, you can learn something from everything, right, Mike? What advice do you have for our listeners out there who have situations like that and need to better understand how they can take advantage of just tapping into the people they're with?
I think 100% leaders are curious. It goes back to, I love this clip, and I know I go off on these tangent statements, so just ride with me, man.
Yeah.
There's a clip of, I think it's Ted Lasso,
Okay.
where he talks about being curious. They're playing darts. You know what I'm talking about? Are you familiar with the clip?
Of course. Yeah.
And they make this bet on playing darts. And, the whole, whatever it is, I've never even seen the whole show, but I've seen the clip and it sticks out. And he's talking about, the best, I think he says the best, most intelligent people are curious. Because if that was the case, you would have asked the question, hey, Ted, you played a lot of darts? To that, I'd say, yep, every Sunday afternoon with my father till I was, 15 years old or whatnot. And so I think it boils down to, if you want better answers and you want to learn more, it's important to ask better questions. And I think so often we'll meet somebody and we're enamored with their persona, or we're excited about what we perceive them to be. And we ask a lot of stuff on the surface because sometimes we don't want to hurt feelings, or we don't want to seem dumb, right? Let's be like, ego gets in the way of learning. It really does. And so we have to be willing to bruise our egos a little bit and say, okay, well, let me ask some really good questions of this person and connect with them. And one of the things that I've always found, and this goes back to sales, you said we could get into sales and management. I think leadership ties right into sales. If you want to someone to be interested in you and share their knowledge, then show an interest in them. Show a genuine interest. If you show a genuine interest in that person, just like before we went on the show here, Damon, you and I were sitting and talking, and my goodness, I have no shortage of the words. You asked, you were just asking about me. And that's one of the things that I think human nature is, yeah, people will love to tell you about themselves. So when you take a genuine interest, then you become interesting to them. And most people are more than willing to share their knowledge. They're more than willing. It comes down to remove that veil of fear of, well, gosh, if I ask this question, it might seem dumb. Ask the question,
Absolutely. I've been at Learn It for 29 years. We're a live learning platform. Prior to that, I played baseball, and I learned great lessons there on leadership. And that's really where I picked up the importance of learning agility. Because when you're playing sports, you go up to the plate, you strike out, you gotta, sometimes you get feedback, but you gotta take the learnings you have and then put them into practice, within 30 minutes, your next at bat. So I didn't realize it at the time, but what I learned playing baseball was able to carry over to my career. And learning has been not only the services we provide our customers, but a huge part of my life professionally and personally.
Yeah, that real-time learning, that real-time feedback when you're a baseball player, I did little leagues. I'm not athletic. I'm certainly no major league baseball player. I did 6 years of little league. I was a decent fielder, not so decent batter. But I can at least somewhat, on the margins relate. Yeah, batting's hard, And so you go up to bat and it doesn't go so well. Yeah, you are learning on the job, right? You're getting that 100%. Real-time feedback. And so sports is a real great there's a reason why we use sports as a metaphor for leadership all the time, or a metaphor for teams all the time, a metaphor for learning all the time, because you are gaining those skills, and there are all those attributes that directly relate back to what we experience in very real ways in the workplace. And learning, absolutely, there's that real-time feedback that you're receiving. You take a shot in basketball, it either goes in or it doesn't go in. If you're, off to the side or you went too hard, you get that feedback immediately, and if you need to make a correction, right?
Absolutely. And the same is, I believe the same goes when it comes to leadership, because you go in, let's say you either give a presentation or you have a one-on-one, there's always learning opportunities, not only, John, for yourself, but also the team members that you coach. And of course, Learn It does things like we have our, formal learning programs, but there's also, like you mentioned, so many great opportunities for in the moment learning opportunities. And really, that's what I think it comes to, where the intersection is, and what really helps create what we like to call learn it all learning cultures.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the real-time opportunities are fantastic. That's why it's wonderful when we have a dynamic of and a culture of learning where everyone can be a mentor and a coach to everyone else, where a leader, a supervisor sees it as their role to constantly be providing that coaching, that mentoring, and that feedback to the people around them. That's the differentiator, I think. To just have that constant environment of everyone just helping each other and providing that real-time feedback. I'm thinking back to, I don't even remember the details, but there's this really impactful kind of cheesy video I remember watching back when I was an undergrad student, in like an organizational behavior class or something like that. The teacher shows this video. And it was just so impactful because it was like these blue collar workers down at the dock, and this transformation that happens in this team of these rough, swearing, not particularly well educated, just these people that you wouldn't think, on the face of it, just by the looks of it, you wouldn't think that these people would necessarily be like the prime candidates to establish like this learning organization, this dynamic or this culture of coaching and mentoring and constant learning and growth. And yet that's exactly what happens with this team, with this organization. And over the arc of like this 6 months and this year, you see this transformation happening in this like 10-minute video where they're kind of showing how this happens. And I just remember the light bulb going off in my mind. I'm like, oh my gosh, if that can happen in an organization like that with that kind of workers, you think about that happening at like a Google or something like that. But if it can happen with blue collar workers, it could happen with anybody. Like you can literally do that with anybody. It's all about mindset. It's all about developing that type of culture where everyone knows that they're expected to learn and grow, and that they're expected to hold each other accountable for learning and for personal growth.
I didn't see the video. It sounds great. But I also believe, John, it all starts with leadership. It starts at the top. If you want to create a culture of leadership, you need the senior leaders, the CEO, the C level team to buy into it. And not only buy into it by, investing and saying, hey, go out and do it, by also participating, rolling up their sleeves and actually getting involved, participating in the trainings, and making sure that they're giving their team members space to learn. I like to call it learning time off, LTO, right? So it's one thing to just, invest money in it, but it's also making sure that people carve out the time that they have to be able to do training. And then learning outside of the formal classroom, as we were just talking about, the importance of being able to learn, be curious, and try things on the job. And if things don't go right, you got to create a culture that you have a psychologically safe space where it's okay to fail, right? And people need to know that their leadership has their back. They're either going to be supportive or they're going to help them come in and correct it. Because if people feel like that they're in an organization where they can't fail, well, if they can't fail, then they're not going to take chances. And if they're not going to take chances, they're really not going to grow and they're not going to learn. And I'm sure you feel the same way, I think a lot of the best learning opportunities come from failure. So it starts with leadership. And if you're a leadership team that you think you know it all and you have it all figured out and you're not vulnerable and asking for help, I think you're going to get, for lack of a better term, stomped on and just left behind.
Yeah, yeah. And I think part of that is, we live in such uncertain times, such volatile times, the rapid pace of change that we're in. If we have any hope of being relevant in the future of work, we have to be adaptive, right? And
100%.
how in the world can you be adaptive if you're not constantly learning? right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at there's studies out there that show that the lifespan of skills now are about 6 months. So
Yeah.
let's say you're a computer science major, you're graduating in June. You by the time January comes around, you need a whole new skill set. So how are you going to be able to keep up and continue to learn and grow? Or how are you going to be able to be productive if you're not constantly learning and evolving?
Yeah. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on what with this kind of lifelong learning mentality, this culture of learning mindset, and trying to create that dynamic within your team. What can leaders do to lead in uncertain times?
Well, I think what leaders can do to lead in uncertain times, like right now, for instance, because there's a lot of chaos in the world, right? Whether it's politics or whether it's uncertainty about the market. First and foremost, I think it's really important for leaders to be transparent with their team and communicate as much as possible. Because if teams, I mean, people are seeing that there's layoffs going around out there, and if you're not transparent with your team with where things are at, then people in their mind, John, they kind of make up their own story. Like
Yep.
how I don't know, use Learn It as a case. I don't know how Learn It's doing. Maybe we're struggling, and I think that a lot of times leaders are afraid to be transparent because they're like, okay, well, people are going to get either too stressed out or they're going to quit.
Mm-hmm,
What I've
mm-hmm.
always found in working with the customers we work with is that if you are transparent, then people will kind of like you'll see a relief in them. They'll get focused on their job, and I think that that's really where great ideas come from, because they'll all get on the same page and they'll know where things stand, and you'll get ideas bubbling up. People get curious, they'll try to find ways to be innovative and help your company instead of you being guarded. So to me, leading in uncertain times is about being transparent and over communicating. And I was always a big fan of Winston Churchill, and how he handled the Battle of Britain, right, where he was very honest with the country, what was going on, but he was also, at the end of the day, he was positive. He's like, let's work together and we can get through this. So I think that those are my three tips for leading in uncertain times.
Yeah, and I like you said, I see it all the time, and I mean sometimes maybe there are nefarious reasons for why leaders aren't more transparent, why they don't share more, and why they hold information close to the vest. But in uncertain times, I think really oftentimes it's like you just said, they're worried about sharing information that are going to upset their people. That they don't know all the information, and
Right.
so they're waiting to learn more. They're waiting till they have a clear picture to be able to share with their people. I think that's a very common situation. In fact, right now at my home university, we're in that kind of a situation because Utah happens to be like Florida and Texas. Utah happens to also be a very politically conservative state, and so we have our legislature has passed some bills that impact the public university system, similar to Florida and Texas. And so there's some dynamics happening politically that are impacting the university that we're still not quite sure how it's all going to play out. We're not sure what all the implications are. So we actually find ourselves in that exact situation right now. And I can tell you from the faculty perspective, kind of, we just want to know, like, we just want some updates. And I don't need to know all the details. I don't even need specifics, and I don't need definite answers. I just want updates. I just want to know, like, what kind of conversations are happening. Is there some sort of a strategy? Just something. I would just love some sort of updates. And radio silence is not what I want. And that's what we're getting, and that's where people then start to fill in the gaps. Like you say, people just start to make stuff up. People start to gossip. They just start to go to the worst case scenario, and people start freaking out. And so in times of uncertainty, leaders may think they're doing the best thing by holding cards close to their vest and waiting until they have something to say. But really, they may be hurting their cause. They may be making things worse. And if you can be a little bit more open, a little bit more transparent, trust your people to have those open conversations, even if that just means, hey, we don't actually really know what the implications are right now. We're exploring this. We're thinking through it. We'll let you know when we have updates, etc. That will go a long way in building trust with your people.
100%. And that's what I was just piggybacking what you said. That's what I was talking about, over communicating. Yeah, you don't have to get into all the details, and there's some things that people don't need to know, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but I think it's about being consistent and just not going radio silent. And another thing is, during uncertain times, it's to have empathy for your team, and maybe even when you can, get together with them on a regular basis and just ask them how they're doing. I think great leaders are also, if you get a group together and just say, what's going on with you? How are you feeling? Giving them an opportunity to speak as well, and open up the floor where they could ask questions. There's just staying connected, I think, is so important during challenging times.
Yeah. And, that empathy piece, I think we need to consider. I mean, especially in this kind of post-COVID world, there was a lot of talk about leading with empathy during COVID. People were dealing with a lot, heightened anxieties, lots of burnout. I think people recognize, yeah, we need to have a lot of empathy during that time. Maybe it hasn't been talked about quite as much since then, but we need to remember that that's still really important. I'm wondering if you see a connection between this lifelong learning idea and leading with empathy, especially in uncertain times.
Well, I think the yes, the members of your team who probably need the most empathy and have a lot of challenges right now are really the middle managers, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because they got the executives who are pulling them in one direction and they're trying to take care of their team, and so they're pulled in both directions. So for senior leaders, you got to have empathy for your middle managers, and that's where the lifelong learning helps out too. It's like, help give them some of the skills or that they need to be successful, whether it's coaching or whether it's mentorship. But you got to be mindful of what's going on with them. So I definitely think that there's a correlation between continuous learning, empathy, and dealing with leading during uncertain times. And especially, even if your organization is going through downsizing and you're have to let people go, I really believe, John, that's a critical time to invest in learning for your team, because the tasks and the responsibilities, they don't go away. They're still there. So
Yeah.
you have less people who are probably, by the way, freaked out and demoralized
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
their friends and coworkers are gone. They feel like, things aren't going well here. But if you invest in them in training, coaching, learning, whatever it is you can do, you're helping rescale them to be more productive. And even outside of work, you're showing them that, hey, my organization still cares for me. So I think that that's a way to show empathy as well when it comes to learning. And also, it's going to help your organization because, like I said, those tasks and responsibilities don't go away. They're still there.
Yeah, yeah. Your point about middle management in particular, we often talk about leaders having empathy for frontline workers. During the pandemic, we talked about first responders, et cetera. Absolutely. We need to have empathy for frontline workers, customer facing, first responders, et cetera. Absolutely. But yeah, what about middle managers? Get stuck in between, they get sandwiched, and they
It's
have so much
tough.
pressure. It's tough. They get so much pressure, and they carry that weight day in and day out. And a lot of times they're the forgotten kind of behind the scenes heroes
Yeah.
that really just carry such a burden. And when you talk about burnout, middle managers often carry a lot of the brunt of that because, frankly, they're expected to provide that empathy and that compassion and the support for their team, and they don't really have anyone providing it for themselves, right? So that's super important. You mentioned something else. I think it ties directly into lifelong learning and a culture of learning, a culture of growth and development within our organizations. And that really is just having curiosity, like staying curious, having an experimentation culture. Um, and I think if we're having empathy for our people, then we create a psychologically safe place where people feel like they can try stuff. Like when I think of someone who has no empathy or no compassion, they're like so, just like by the book driven, so compliance based. Like everyone's just kind of fearful. And in that environment, nobody's trying anything. People kind of show up, they do their work, they're by the book, they kind of keep their head down, do what they need to do their job and do it well enough that they don't get fired. And they're certainly not trying anything above and beyond because they're just afraid of being noticed. And if they're noticed, chances are something will get noticed that will get someone upset at them, right? Because
totally.
Everyone's going to do something that isn't going to be always right. Nobody's perfect, and you're going to mess up at some point. And so if you have empathy, compassion, you recognize that everybody's human. You recognize that everyone's going to, quote, fail. And in fact, you're going to recognize that failure is only failure if you're not learning from it. And so you create this environment where curiosity wins the day. Like you actually want people to experiment. You want people to iterate rapidly. You want them to try things out. And in fact, the only failure is if you don't learn from what you did. If you try something and it didn't work, and then you just repeat it, yes, that's a failure. But if you try something, especially if you fall forward, fail fast, any of these kind of generic
terms,
sayings, but they mean something. If you do that, and you're not like losing the company tons of money, but you're trying something that matters because you learn from it and you grow from it, and then you're going to help the company move forward from it. That's what drives innovation, right?
Well, first of all, you said you want them to do that. I disagree. You need them to do that.
Yeah.
You need them to do that. You need them. And I think curiosity is a through line through all of this to come to creating a great learning culture. You want your people to be curious. You want them to try. You want them to go out there, iterate, try, fail, learn. When we hire people at Learn It, or when I'm coaching our customers, the very first conversation I have with everybody is, look, we're bringing you here. And if you're just going to be on a railroad tracks and just head down and just do your job, then I don't want you here. There's really nothing. I mean, this isn't heart surgery. So there's really nothing you're going to do that's going to blow up the organization. So I want you to go out there and I want you to try things. Okay. And if it doesn't work, then it's fine to make mistakes, but kind of like you just said, but let's just not make the same mistake 10 times. Let's learn from that mistake and then make different mistakes, but go out there, do things. And I think that's one of the things. I've been able to surround myself with a great team over the years, and I think that's one of the reasons is because not just me, but my leadership team has given people the safe space to try and have fun. And if things fail, they fail. And also, I think it's important and I don't think it's really failure until you give up anyways, right? Because if you learn from it, then great. But I also think it's important that if senior leaders make a mistake, then just be open about it. Like, hey, I messed this up. This is what happened. And by the way, maybe I could turn to you to help me with it. I mean, I think that it's important to be vulnerable, to have compassion for people. And then it just creates a much more vibrant organization, because when you said, head down and you don't want to get noticed, I mean, that's just freaking miserable for people.
It is for everybody.
It's just miserable. And you're not going to push your organization forward. And the worst part about it is, in my book, it's called A Learn It All Leader. There's learn-it-alls and there's know-it-alls. The worst is the leaders who are know-it-alls. They think they have all the answers, and they're the bottleneck in an organization, right? Because everybody has to come to them for something, and everybody else is afraid to make mistakes. And I think it's just miserable. So I think the human aspects of leadership and what we've talked about today is critical. John, now more than ever with the rapid change of AI and the uncertainty in the world. So you just got to give people a little grace, give them an opportunity to make mistakes, try to make it fun, have patience for your team, and celebrate their wins and just make sure that they know that you have their back if things don't go well.
Yeah, I love that. I love all of that.
So what do you wish more people knew?
I wish more people knew that real growth only occurs outside of your comfort zone. And to do so, you have to be curious. And this goes for both organizations and individuals.
Okay, so a willingness to risk, a willingness to fail, a willingness to learn. And I want to share with you a quote here from Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, who said this, and it really struck me, and I want to get your reaction to it. He said, if you take two kids at school, one of them has more innate capability and is a know-it-all. The other has less innate capability, but is a learn-it-all. The learn-it-all always does better than the know-it-all. It seems to me that there's a case to be made here as well for leaders as learners. Make that case for us.
Well, I'm a big believer, and you probably heard this say, but great leaders aren't born or made. They're constantly in the making. And if you come across with a know-it-all mentality and you're not curious at all, and you have it all figured out, you're not going to be relevant for very long, because with the rapid pace of change and how everything is going, great leaders know that there's always more to learn, and they need to be humble enough to put themselves out there and realize that they don't have all the answers and they got to find ways to get them.
For many leaders, the pressure to appear confident and decisive, to basically be a know-it-all, it makes it harder for them to ask questions, to be a learner, and to be in that learning mode. What can leaders do to cultivate this curiosity, this learning mindset, in spite of the perceived risks?
Well, you and I are both hosts, right? And we've interviewed hundreds of great leaders. And the best leaders I've ever interviewed are humble and aren't afraid to be vulnerable, but they do it in a way that they're also confident. And so it's totally fine to say, I don't know. I don't have the answer to something, but also have a game plan for how you're going to figure that out, whether it's by surrounding yourself with great people who can help get you that answer, or say to whoever it is, look, I'll come back to you in 3 days with that answer. I believe that being humble and vulnerable actually helps you build trust within organizations with other leaders.
Yeah, trust is the currency of leadership, difficult to earn and very easy to spend. I'm wondering about this notion of continuous learning. Within organizations, what are sort of the greatest barriers, the greatest blockers that inhibit leaders from fostering curiosity other than their own self-doubts?
There's a great line I once heard that learning without doing is treason. So you have to take what you've learned and apply it and execute it. It all starts off at the top. The leaders, the C-level and senior level leaders, need to model the behavior that they want the rest of their organization to do, right? So that starts with trying things. And by doing that, I think it allows a psychologically safe space for the rest of the organization to feel like, hey, my team, my leaders have my back, so I can try things and I'm not going to be punished or reprimanded if I make mistakes. Now, I mean, there's different levels of mistakes that can be made. We all know that. The difference between somebody who's a surgeon and them making a mistake and somebody making a mistake maybe on a product release. But I think you need to cultivate a culture where people feel comfortable asking questions, being curious, especially these days with AI. I think every question should be, what is a better way to do this? And how can AI help me even enhance what we're doing?
When we were together on your show, we talked about the work of Charles Bosk and how when he studied the success rates of neurosurgeons in their training programs, the ones that actually made it through were not the ones with the strongest backgrounds, the most talent, the best training. They were the ones who actually reflected on their mistakes and turned those mistakes into learning moments. And I feel like if leaders do the same thing where they normalize failure and approach with curiosity and a learner's mindset, they can probably do the same.
I always tell people, you got to find ways to be comfortable with failure. You know, be comfortable with people saying no to you when you're out there, if you're in sales, making mistakes. I think a lot of times done is better than perfect. And you just got to get comfortable with that, right? And because not everything is going to go in a linear format. And I think the best leaders do. And I like what you said right there, because you got to have self-awareness too, right? To be able to say to yourself, hey, you know, this is how I'm going to try to go about something. If it doesn't work, I'm going to learn from it. And like you always talk about with feedback is fuel for learning and growth.
For too many organizations, there's short-term pressures that are interfering with long-term thinking. What can they do to balance the short-term demands against the long-term space that's needed for learning?
I think one thing that they can do that I found is carve out spaces for people to try things and test, like in a sandbox, right? And if it fails, at least you could learn from there. I like to call it purposeful awfulizing. So a lot of times people always want to look at it from a very positive perspective, like what's the best case? I think you should look at it like absolute worst case. And if it's something you can't survive, then obviously it shouldn't be something that you're gambling on completely. So find a safe space in a sandbox and give people the opportunity to try and innovate and get curious there.
Yeah, Amy Edmondson was here not too long ago talking about intelligent failures. What are some of the small incremental changes and tests that we can make in the way that we produce our products or lead our people that might in the moment seem very high risk, but they're actually the perfect approaches for testing new ideas and new practices because they're sized just right so that even if it does go wrong, you still have a good outcome.
Yeah, you could overcome it. And one thing I like to say about mistakes is I'm totally fine with people making mistakes, right? I just want them to make new mistakes. Don't continue to make the same mistake over and over, because if you continue to make the same mistake, it obviously means you're not self-aware and you're not learning. So I think mistakes are great fuel for growth, and just continue to learn how to make different mistakes.
Would you say that this really all starts with leaders setting the tone, setting the conditions for normalizing risk-taking in the workplace, or does it require a certain confidence, a certain courage among individual contributors so that they can begin to take those steps and then receive the support from leadership when they need it?
I found it starts with leadership, 100%. And I say that because I've got friends, people I mentor, and even seeing some of our customers where it's the type of organization where if people make mistakes, they're going to get reprimanded. They could even lose their jobs. So everybody is, one, saying yes to whatever the executives or the CEO has to say, and they just go about doing their business, regardless of how much confidence they have as an individual. They don't want to risk losing their job by making a mistake that can cost them personally. I think great organizations where people feel like they have an opportunity to, be curious and to innovate, and they have the support and feel like their leaders have their back, that will help generate the confidence that they need to go out and try things. And not only try things, but they actually take accountability. People aren't pointing fingers. They own up to it and say, "Hey, look, this one's on me. I'm going to figure out how to make it better next time."
Mm-hmm. You're a baseball player. You played college, right? D1?
In my glory days. Back in at Arizona State back in the 90s.
So you know this as an athlete that you're not going to make every shot you take. You're not going to hit every pitch thrown your way. What are some lessons you've taken from the field into leading this company now, knowing that perfection isn't the goal, it's progress?
When people ask me, what's the most important skill that we need for the future? It's learning agility, the ability to learn something, unlearn, and relearn. Let's say I go up to bat and I think this guy is a great fastball pitcher, but maybe he's getting his curveball over for strikes. I strike out. Hopefully I get some feedback from my coach, right? But I got to learn on the spot, because in 15 minutes, I have to make the adjustments and figure out what I need to do to get things done and to get a hit. And even if I'm lucky, I'm still going to fail 7 out of 10 times. And that's why I think it's so great when you talk about fearless feedback. You got to just be comfortable with failure and figure out what your definition of failure is. I don't even think it's a failure unless you just quit on something. And
failing to try.
Failing to try. That's
failing
to
try.
Right? Yeah, that's when it's failure, if you just give up, right? Or you don't try and get out of your comfort zone and go forward with something. So I would say what I learned most from sports is perseverance, because you're going to have quite a few failures, and learning agility, the ability to adapt, grow, and again, be curious, because you got to be curious, whether it's in sports and in business, is if you want to be able to continue to evolve.
And that's encouraging for individual contributors who may not be working in the moment in a culture where leadership encourages this sort of thing or models it. And they still have that control to stay curious and to be agile in their own learning orientation. That's still something they can do.
Right. And I think no matter what environment you're in, you should look for learning opportunities. And they don't have to be formal learning opportunities. If you are leading an organization where you really limit what people can do and don't give them an opportunity to failure, you're going to lose great people because nobody wants to be stuck in a box, right? If you're a talented individual, you need the opportunity to grow and learn. Talk to me a little bit about some of the stats. I loved it. So why do ex-athletes make great CEOs for small businesses?
Let's start with high-level stats, and this is all research-backed and data-backed, and anyone can pick it up, look in the book, shoot me an email, whatever they want. But athletes versus non-athletes in the business world as business owners, okay? 15% higher return on assets. This is from that investor standpoint, right? If you look at the business as an asset, so they're returning 15% higher on those assets. Those athletes are 17% longer tenured than non-athletes, more resilient. From an investor's lens, investors, that key to success, right? If they're going to buy a business at these levels, the key to success, often the private equity community talks about this, is that CEO. So 17% longer tenured, they're going to keep showing up. Okay, we got something here. And then 12%, they utilize 12% lower debt on businesses at this level. So I pin it athletes versus NARPs, non-athletic regular people in the business world.
What is it? NARP?
Yeah, it's athletes versus NARPs. And that's not to say, look, I'm not saying if you didn't play sports, you're not a great CEO, you don't have it. What I am saying if you did play sports, there's a high rate that you got it, right? So athletes versus NARPs. So those there. So what's driving this success, right? I want to know. This is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. Understand how do we drive business success? And so then you take it from there and you tailor it down to the soft skills developed in sports, right? The creative thinking, the empathy, the resilience, and you find commonalities in there. And that these folks have really learned what it takes to drive business success. Damon, you could be with your company, you could be great on spreadsheets. You could have your MBA from Harvard and you'd be incredible. But if your team, you don't have camaraderie with your team, and you don't have all these other soft skills, you might as well pack your bags and get out of there.
If you don't have, I think a big one is if you don't have trust of your team, if your team doesn't feel like that you communicate clearly, that you have their back, that you're transparent, those are all things as well you learn from playing sports, and it makes a huge difference. I think another skill, Jay, that comes up quite a bit when I have these conversations for athletes is learning agility. With adaptability, learning agility, flexible thinking. And for our listeners out there, and I bring this up, I beat this drum to the point where my staff gets tired of hearing it, especially with what's happening with AI. The rapid pace of change is like never before. And we have to be able to have a growth mindset and be adaptable and learn how to integrate AI into our businesses to help us grow and evolve. It's super important.
Oh, you nailed it. I'm picking up my book here because I wanted to see where I cited in there, but adaptability, I wanted to see the study I cited, but I can't recall off the top of my head. But adaptability is a big one. It's to be able to pivot and to move and to utilize that growth mindset and to pivot, because business evolves and people evolve and things change all the time. You and I can nerd out on this AI stuff, but I'm telling you, I just think it's going to keep, AI is a great tool and it's going to keep eating at those hard skills. So like for me, like with what I do on the back end with finance and investing in businesses and all that, I'm constantly on top of. I think AI will get there with the numbers, but it's still too high of a hallucination. But I think AI is going to keep eating these hard skills, these quantitative skills, and the need for those folks is going to continue to shrink, and the need for former athletes and athletic education is going to continue to increase.
I couldn't agree more. Preaching to the choir. Talk to me a little bit about if somebody is an ex-athlete and they are an entrepreneur. They have two routes and they want to own their own business, especially if they want to own their own small business. There's two routes you can go, right? You can start from scratch, startups. Tell us about the difference between startups and acquiring or buying a business?
Yeah, absolutely. If we go back to the reason of what I do and solving that identity gap. So it's common knowledge, I think, where our startups 90% fail, right? So those ideas fail. And I'm a big idea person. I think we always need ideas out there and people to go out there and try them. However, getting people back into successful positions in their business life, it's called entrepreneurship through acquisition. And it's a timely model. Yeah, ETF. It's a timely model. I'm a big fan of it. Just being in the world of mergers and acquisitions forever, I've seen this model has historically been locked up at Stanford, Harvard, and the elite business schools. And so these elite business schools have been taking their investors and their MBA and investing in their MBAs to go out and buy small companies. And then they buy the company for them and give them equity. And it's a neat model. And so I just dissected it and I said, look, you don't need to go to Harvard. You don't need to go to Stanford. You don't need to go to these great schools. Not hurting the schools. Nothing wrong. If you get the opportunity to go and you take that and you utilize it the way it is, fantastic. Good for you. But I just deconstructed their model and said, look, what they're lacking. Look, I sat in between a lot of these deals and I remember folks coming in from Harvard and all that and trying to buy a business. And very rarely were they taught the soft skills to get the deal done. And very rarely did those deals get done, right? If you want to go buy a $20 million plumbing company that man or woman had built. So a small business. Yeah. So we use the term small business. These are thriving companies making millions of dollars a year, bottom line for people, and doing quite well. They started it. It's been a part of their life for a long time. Don't come in with your spreadsheets. Don't do that. They care about people. They care about their baby. They care about all that other stuff. I went to a program called Deal Camp out in Montauk, New York. And Miss Donna is leading it. And as I'm exploring private equity, I got to know what these investors are talking about. I got to get in on this. What are you guys doing? I'm just a curious guy. And her first slide, I'm sitting out there. We've got all these big Wall Street people. We've got these incredible investors. It's Columbia. It's Ivy League. It's private equity. I'm the athlete. Whoa, okay? Should I be scared? What's going on here? Boom, a slide comes up. I take a picture of it and it says, and it's her slide. And her quote, spreadsheets don't create synergies, people do. I just flipped it and said, look, you don't need to go to these schools. I have the same access to the same, I'm not going to say same, I still got access to the investors. I got the model. When we say buy a business, investors want to buy it for you if you're the right leader. So mine are just, look, these are the right leaders. And so they go through my online program and we teach them those hard skills that these investors want to know and how to buy a business. And it's a great program. I'm in there teaching, and I've got a former Michigan football player that got his master's in finance at MIT, teaching the finance. And in athletic terms, it's fantastic. And then I've got a Harvard peak performance coach in there that teaches the mindset stuff, all in athletic terms.
I love it. And so that's a 3-month program, right?
3 months. So it's self-paced. So it's all built out online, coaching calls. They can click and schedule coaching calls. It's scheduled for 3 months. However, folks can take it at their own pace, right? But what we look at is one of the mechanisms when our coaches are spending their time and they're going to help you source the business, they're going to help you structure the deal, and they're going to help you secure the funding and do all that. We also look at the motivation. So if you sign up for the course and it takes you a year to take it done, it's likely you aren't as motivated as someone who gets in there and knocks it out within 3 months.
I can see that without a doubt. Let me ask you this. Once they complete the course, and let's say you connect them with the business and they buy the business or they get the financing for the business, they take over, do you offer continuous support for them afterwards?
So yeah, absolutely. So our model is this. You go through the course and you come out with a really in-depth and thesis on the type of business you want to own. Industry, region, financial, what it does, all that fun stuff. And also, one of the reasons I partnered with Harvard psychologists on this is you also walk away with what's called an entrepreneur mindset profile. It's all empirically backed, so we can see how you think as an entrepreneur, and we can increase those. And so Jerry and her team will increase those for you. So you walk away with this mindset profile and this thesis on what you want to buy. And then we send it out to investors, and investors will invest in units within you to go out there and search for that business. And once we find that right business to buy, and Damon, it's a timely opportunity between now and 2040. It's the largest wealth transfer in history. Lots of businesses. Yeah. 10 trillion. And that's just the baby boomer number. A lot of 30 and 40-year-olds are on this train of, I want to sell my business. I want a new experience. But we'll take the baby boomer number. It's $10 trillion by 2040. And so private equity, I go back to private equity, I go back to that. They've wanted to unlock this asset class for a long time. So I'm from the investor standpoint, I'm unlocking it. From the athlete, I'm saying, look, you're getting back into the successful role. Back to your question, do we surround them? Yeah. So as soon as we help them structure, buy the business, they get shares in the business, and we come in with an operational advisor and a peak performance coach, huge on mindset. So Jerry on my team is the Harvard Peak Performance. She'll come in and she'll consult with you on the mindset as you're running that business. And we have an operational advisor who's a seasoned entrepreneur within that industry. So if the boring business is a plumbing one, there's cool ones. I'm working on a really neat media deal right now. But that operational advisor is important as well. And it's a team environment, right? It's about creating a team environment and winning again and winning again. Then we just take them through that private equity playbook. Typically, it's a 5 to 7 year journey where they grow that business. Maybe they buy more around it and build their own empire. Maybe they just want a great business where they're the leader and they can utilize their athletic skills and continue to drive success and see that chart continue to go up. And we have victories along the way.
I think it's fantastic. So what's your advice for the athletes out there who hear this or come across your book? Should they just enroll in your program?
If you pick up a copy of the book, I would encourage you to, because I wanted to inspire you to show you that you have the skills for any line of work. You do. And it's quantifiable. So pick up the book for that reason, that it gives you the inspiration for your pain point, Damon, and mine of, oh man, I got nothing. This stinks. I'm not a track star anymore. This stinks. Who am I? I've got no skills. No. Now you do. You do. All the athletes out there, think about when you were growing up and hopefully you had a coach that said, hey, see yourself playing the game the night before and see yourself making big plays. And you start thinking positive. Damon, I'm sure you saw yourself hitting home runs and maybe bottom of the ninth, you're down by a few runs and you hit a grand slam, right? I'm sure you envision that. And so that becomes a habit that not many people out there get, but athletes get that. And so that metacognition, we can tailor that into business. I'm sure you're thinking about the next move all the time and you're finding that positive outcome and you're playing it in your mind. I'm doing it all the time. Top-notch entrepreneurs are doing it all the time, right? They're living in the future. And us athletes, we were taught that.
That's been with me since my Arizona State days. I remember when they brought in somebody to teach us that, and I use it all the time. And back then, I wasn't looking at hitting home runs. I was thinking about hitting line drives the opposite way or catching ground balls. And it just stuck with me. And it helped me, actually calm me going into the game, thinking about that. And now in the business world, if I have to make a big presentation or I have to go do something tough, I do that same thing. I envision having a positive outcome based off of what I learned back in the day from the metacognition. So should they just enroll in your program? Give it a shot? I bring that up, Jay, because I've got a very close friend who played 10 years in the big leagues. And for years, I worked hard trying to convince him that he could be a COO at a lot of companies, right? Multilingual, sharp as can be. He just needed to get over the imposter syndrome and just go for it. But he just thought, maybe I'm just going to be a coach. That's the only world I know. But it's just important for the athletes to realize that, especially somebody on the other side of the fence now, me, from playing sports to running a business successfully for 29 years, that you can really see the potential in some of these individuals, men and women, ex-athletes, that they just need to see in themselves and give it a shot. That's why I said, what's the first step?
We start with the mind. Yeah, and that's intentional as well. Is the first thing you got to do in getting into business is you got to train your mind. You got to train your mind. So these are research-backed strategies and proven strategies to get out of that, and all in the athletic terms, to get out of that and to tailor your mind to be an elite entrepreneur and think like an entrepreneur. And then we go through a very niche playbook that's timely, that the investment community is all fired up about. And we give them an actionable steps as well within these characters and show them how they take these mindsets through these actionable steps to leap themselves into this timely role of CEOs of businesses. I'm going to show you how to translate those soft skills into the world of business. And then quickly, I'm going to give you that mini MBA so you can be dangerous enough to buy, own, and run businesses and be successful again. So I think that, and then if it's interesting to them and they want to get into the game of business at these markets and own their own thriving company and grow it, then sure, I'd love to help them out. Come on in. And if you're motivated, you're ready to rock and roll, I've got a great team for you. And we've got a lot of great businesses out there. So we're just looking for more folks that want to get into this role. If it's interesting to you and you could see yourself in that role, I don't know. For me, it's really fun. For the folks I work with, it's really fun. I get to own a company. I get to be dynamic, creative thinking, resilient, and I get to grow it. And I got skin in the game. And the historical numbers out there in this model is the average entrepreneur walks away with over $6 million. So the money's there in this model. And so if they're motivated by that, sure. But look, you got skin in the game. You get to drive business success again. It's pretty fun, and you're in charge. It's neat.
There's nothing like working for yourself. I don't care what anybody has to say. There's a lot of pressure at times. There's a lot of accountability. But at the end of the day, what I love most about where I work at Learn It is my team. And I look at it from a coaching perspective, is the talent I've been able to surround myself with. And it's typically in a very tough market in San Francisco. It's by finding individuals, like I mentioned to you, I've got 10 plus ex-college athletes who work here now, but finding people maybe earlier on in their career with the aptitude and attitude that you want to give them an opportunity. In my book, Learn It All Leader, I talk a lot about hiring for potential over experience. Now, you can't do that in every position, right? You can't do that in every position. But if I'm interviewing somebody or they come in and obviously, Jay, that they're not coachable, or they just have a fixed mindset or a know-it-all mindset, we call it a lot around here, know-it-all mindset, then you're not the right fit for our team. You're not going to be successful here. I want people who are going to roll up their sleeves. They're not afraid to make mistakes. They're able to get comfortable with failure and learn and grow. Be curious, learn, and grow.
I love that. I bet as a team, and for you mentioned, there's nothing like being in charge of your own business. What's even more rewarding when you're in charge and your team's successful. I'm sure that's the type of leader you are. I'm sure that's what juices you every day.
Hands down. And it's and like my existing team, we got about 45 people right now. Great. I love them. Some have been here for a couple of years. Some are relatively new, but also the network of the alumni who've come through. Yesterday, I went for a walk with this woman named Laurel Taylor, who started here right out of UT. Well, wasn't an athlete, but had the mindset like an athlete. And now her company's rated about $75 million, crushing student debt. And she just happened to be in San Francisco. She's Big D, let's go for a walk. And I don't want to take any credit for what she's done, but she said, hey, you're the one who gave me a chance. I was able to come in and you also helped inspire me to start my own thing. But that's what really juices me is like you said, I think great leaders, we're always trying to evolve into one, but it's serving your team, putting them out first and giving them the tools and resources. And if they stay forever, and this is important out there for all you who are managing a team, don't burn bridges. Somebody can be at your company for a year or two or longer, leave. But all the referrals I get, Jay, into Learn It are usually people who will reach out and say, hey, this guy would be great for Learn It. Or Damon, this is the right type of person you want to work with. So it's building a community that way.
Today's episode, we're going to be discussing the difference between a coach and somebody who I'd like to say is a dictator. And I think this is critical for your team's success if you ever want to scale and grow. Let me start off with a story. I remember 20 years ago, I accompanied one of my top sales reps to our first customer meeting. Now, the story I'm going to share with you is a sales related story, but it could be at any department. Here's what happened. I walked into this meeting with my sales rep who's brand new, and we sat down with the client for the very first time. The sales rep's only been at Learn It, let's say for a month, and was really green. We prepped before the meeting. We kind of went over what was going to happen, what was going to take place. And when we sat down, the meeting completely went haywire. But instead of jumping in and correcting her, what I did was I sat back, I slightly corrected when necessary, but for the most part, she ran the meeting. The meeting actually ended up going pretty well, not because she presented perfectly, but because we were able to build a connection with the customer. And after the meeting, when we left, and I think this is super important, we sat down and we debriefed. I said, hey, what went well? What could you have done differently? And gave her a lot of learning opportunities. Mike Weinberg talks about this in his fantastic book, Sales Management Simplified. Don't be a hero. You're never going to get your team to grow if you jump in and do all the work for them. I want to share another example. Courtney Ritchie on my team, our director of learning services, is fantastic. She's one of the smartest people I know. And early on in her career, when she started managing people, she had a habit of jumping in and getting frustrated and just solving questions and answers for people. But after a while, she realized that By doing so, it just put more work on her. And this really reminds me of a conversation I had with Chris Dyer on an episode of the Learn It All podcast. Chris said when he was running his company and they got to about 200 people, it was hard for them to scale because he had all the answers, right? Everything would stop until Chris came up with a solution. He realized with this happening, he couldn't scale. So kind of like the Taylor Swift song, "It's me, I'm the problem." He, in this case, was the bottleneck. And so he came to realization, which I think a lot of great leaders do, is that if you want to grow and scale, you need to support your team in doing so. You need to allow them, if they come to you with questions, instead of jumping in and saying, "Hey, do this, this, and this," ask them, "What do you think we should do?" Have them think it through. And even if you have ideas, maybe even frame your questions so they can come up with answers that help support what might be the best for your organization. Or if it's something that's not going to, blow up the organization, just allow them to go for it. Say, "You know what? I trust you. Do the best you can." And if things fail as a leader, take ownership for it. Hey, don't worry about it. Let's talk about what we did wrong. Where could we learn? What can we do next time? When you do this, when you give people the autonomy to try and do things, they're going to get pumped up and they're going to want to come to you all the time with solutions and ideas. If you don't, if you jump in and you solve everything themselves, then why hire great people? Because you're stunting their growth. It makes no sense. So give people the opportunity for learning and growth. And if they fail, if they make mistakes, and sometimes you can even celebrate mistakes. And the best way to celebrate mistakes is being honest and vulnerable as a leader. A lot of times, if I mess something up, I'll shoot an email to the team or on a call, say, "I really messed this up. Does anybody have an idea how to make this better or do it differently?" And by having a culture like that, where you lead by being vulnerable and showing people that, hey, we're humans and we make mistakes, it's going to energize people. They're going to buy in to your work, to your company, and they're going to look at it like that you're giving them growth and future opportunities throughout their career. And by doing so, this is one of the best ways to scale. You need great people and you need to give them clear direction and let them try things, okay? Nothing's going to be perfect, but that's how you grow and evolve. So to recap, if you want to build great future leaders, and if you want to take some of the work off your plate, you got to learn how to not jump in and be a hero. When people come to you, take a deep breath, have patience, hear them out, and help coach them to answering questions and problems. I promise you, if you do so, you build an incredibly strong team with a bunch of motivated individuals. They're going to come to you with great creative and innovative ideas, and they're going to be bought in and help drive future success of your organization.
When you're looking at young kids, what are some of the natural abilities or traits that you're looking for to identify if they have the leadership skills?
Yeah, so that's so interesting because, as a leadership guy, I'm familiar with dozens and dozens of assessments, and you probably are too. But most of those that you give to to coach a manager or to coach a CEO or president of a company, most of those have to do with effectiveness. But effectiveness means that you either are in a role or have a sense of leadership. But I was more interested in emergence. How do we discern who is going to be an emerging leader? And so what we learned is that there are 4 kind of qualities we see in emerging leaders. And you can have a child can have 1 or 2 of these and maybe not have leadership talent, but if they have all 4, I guarantee they do. So, and we put them together kind of in alliteration. They all start with P, so you can remember them. But 1 is persuasive. They're persuasive. And leaders are always selling. So you can be a salesperson and not lead. You can persuade and not lead, but leaders have to be able to persuade. So this is the kid who they're not throwing a hissy fit on aisle 2 of Walmart. This is the kid who he'll go to his mom and say, "Okay, Mom, I want to stay up late and watch this Disney movie." Mom says, "Well, it's a school night." And so the kid says, "Well, I realize that, but my lunch is packed, my homework is done, my clothes are laid out. I promise in the morning I will not complain." And he just goes through that. And the mother said, well, okay. And says, "Yes, you can." And the door closes and the mother says, "How does he always do that?" Right? So they're just good at pleading their case, and they get kids to follow them. They get adults to follow them, and they get their way. So they're very persuasive. Another is they're propelled. And by propulsion or being propelled, we mean they self-initiate things. They're starters. So they're the entrepreneur. They'll start a club at recess. They start a game. They initiate. So again, you can initiate and be self-propelled and not a leader, but you're probably a solo entrepreneur. You're a high achiever, but you're not bringing people with you. what young leaders do is they initiate things and others follow them. Another is a planner. So it's not so much engineering, but it's a strategic thinker. So strategic thinkers, they are big picture, small picture people together. Usually people tend to be one or the other. They're dreamers, they're visionaries, but they have a hard time figuring out a plan. Conversely, some people are really good at taking another person's vision and then they create steps. But a leader's kind of good at both. They work in their right brain, left brain hemispheres of the brain, and they see the big picture of the vision, and then they come up with some next steps, some strategies. So that's a planner. And then the fourth thing is power. They're comfortable with influence. And so even in preschool, remember that Silicon Valley school, the preschoolers who had influence and leadership capacity, they like to be the teacher's helper. And I first thought, well, a helper is not really a leader. They said, no, they like to be under the power and authority of the teacher. So I said, okay, I get that, right? So they want to be big stuff. So that ability to take charge, and sometimes in school they get labeled as troublemakers because they'll stand up to a teacher or a principal if they think they're being unfair. So they'll stand up to the bully. And so that's why sometimes they can be intimidating, but it's not that they're bad. It's that they're okay with power and they tend to seek places where they can be in charge. So again, most schools tend not to be, well, maybe I should say they're leader averse, right? Because it's about compliance, it's about conformity. And if you and I came home and there was a nail sticking out of our carpet, we'd get a hammer and we'd knock it down. So a lot of leaders get knocked down in school because schools don't appreciate them standing out. But they're okay with power. So those are the 4 qualities we found in emerging leaders that gives you an idea, hey, I need to develop this person.
I think what you're saying is true, is schools have a tendency to build followers, not leaders.
Yeah. And it's not that they're bad, but most teachers aren't trained to do leadership. Most teachers aren't leaders, and they're educators. They love kids. That's not a ding. It's just that when you have 40 kids in a class, how do you do that? So I found that about 3/4 of teachers, they don't like the kids with influence. About 1/4 like them. And they like them because they tap the natural social influence of these kids and they sort of use that to control them, the rest of the kids. So they'll say, hey, Johnny, I have to go to the principal's office. Boom, you're in charge. So Johnny says, okay, guys, do your homework, page 27. Well, Johnny's a natural leader, right? So the teacher's saying, I'm going to use this for myself. I'm going to use them as an ally. They're not an opponent. So other teachers, they see them as a competition, go down to the principal's office. My hunch is that a lot of people in the principal's office are just budding CEOs.
I have to agree with that. And I'm hoping that my 3-year-old son follows that, because he's all about the power and he's all about being resistant, But so earlier you were saying that the optimal age is around 10 to 13, right? And you want to get them when they're moldable over moldy, right? So why is 10 to 13 the target age?
I think you can start to see leadership abilities when they start to socialize. So as early as 2 or 3, and we have an assessment even that parents can take on their preschooler. But then when they get into school, like at age 5, they change a little more cognitively developed. But at 10, there is this sort of crossroads. If you look at moral development, social emotional maturity, and cognitions, there's an upswing right around 10. And we worked with 8 or 9-year-olds, and we said, well, some 9-year-olds are ready for this and some aren't. Usually more girls are ready at 9 than boys. But at 10, it was just like this perfect mix of the ability to learn things and work well. And if something doesn't go well, that's to say, okay, we're going to learn and we're going to do it again, right? So they had that sort of resilience and social and emotional maturity. At 14, hormones kick in and adolescents are far more adult-like. So for us, it was kind of like this 10, they're old enough, and 13, they're still young enough. At 14 and up, you can still train them, but it's a different approach. It's more adult-like, and the other is more fun activities. All of our curricula are project-based because leadership, you learn by doing it. You don't learn it from a book. You and I have written books on leadership, but at the end of the day, we both know and you learn leadership by doing. I think the 10 to 13, we call that the 10-13 window. I think that's the optimum time to begin serious leadership training where you receive coaching, give coaching, and you see them do amazing things. That's pretty impressive.